So now we'll take some questions. We are nearing the end of this series, but not entirely. I'm pretty sure I'll wrap it up next week. It certainly won't go more than 2 weeks. But just in case, once again, I offer the disclaimer that if a question is asked that I know for a fact will be covered in the future, I will defer it. Jeff's got the microphone.
All right. Any questions, comments, cries of heresy?
Always start with those.
Yeah, it's true.
You got any online?
Let's see, I actually have it pulled up here.
Nothing yet. I actually told Katie ahead of time that I was going to be answering her question today. Make sure she's tuned in. And she was like, oh, then I guess I won't have any questions. And we'll see about that.
Okay.
Man, I covered it so well. Just
yeah, you did
100%.
You did it.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
no,
absolutely.
There's got to be something.
Oh, here we go. Do any of the sacrifices that Abraham was commanded to bring coincide with Torah commands?
I'm going to answer this with the assumption that this is referring to his making of the covenant of the pieces. Yes, I mean, there are different ones. In fact, what you get is kind of a sampling of all the different cases, right? Take, for example, a sin offering. You would offer a different offering based on your, to use a term everybody hates now, class, right? If you were a lay person, if you were just a normal average Joe Israelite, average Yo Israelite, I guess, you'd offer one offering. If you were excessively impoverished and you couldn't afford to bring a lamb, I believe it is, you'd offer a turtle dove, right, or a pigeon, because they're cheaper. That's sort of the thing. But if the high priest sinned, or if the king sinned, they offered a larger offering, right, all the way up to a bull, which was basically the most expensive. That's really what it breaks down to. So we do see Abraham. He offered the birds. He offered a cow. He offered a goat. Right? I mean, you kind of get a sampling of all of the different ones. Now, specifically for Abraham, it wasn't a sin offering that he was told to do this. This was the making of a covenant. It was the shedding of blood. And that's literally what make a covenant in Hebrew is actually cut. It's not even the word make, it's the word cut, because it refers to doing that. And you see, most times when covenants are made, there is some sort of cutting. Circumcision is a covenant, right? And there's cutting. So does it relate to the sacrifices? Yes. I mean, like I said, it kind of encompasses all the different animals. But that's not to say that his covenant making was itself sort of a stand-in for any particular offering. In general, there's 5 different types of offerings, and we see him kind of sampling each one.
Any other thoughts? Any other questions?
So we have another one online.
Oh, okay, great. Messages came in. All right. And we read the proselytes at and we read, quote, the proselytes at Pentecost. Weren't these converted Jews, as in the time at Sinai, mixed multitude, quote unquote, mixed multitude?
Well, I feel like there's 2 questions there. So proselyte is a term that is used to refer to somebody who had undergone ritual conversion, right? So it's somebody that had gone into their local Jewish community and had said, hey, I want to be a Jew. And they would say, okay, well, you and all the males in your household have to be circumcised. You have to offer an offering, and you have to be immersed. Those were essentially the 3 requirements to be accepted as a proselyte. They'd also discourage them, put them off for a long time. In fact, even today, modern conversions to Judaism, they do the same thing. Basically, they make you wait, and they try to get you to decide not to do it. But yeah, so proselyte would be somebody that had already undergone conversion and had been accepted into their Jewish communities. So them being present at Pentecost, kind of the mixed multitude, yes. But you know specifically it's Shavuot, right? It's one of the 3 Chagim, one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. So all of these people from all of these different places, I think it's 14 different territories that Luke names, all of these different places that they're coming from, representative of the world, are all in Jerusalem at the same time. Why? It's for Shavuot, right? They're not just there because they happen to be on vacation. There's all these people there, and it says Jews and proselytes from all over the world, representative of, I think, God pulling his people out of, right? He scattered them to every nation. That was the point of the exile. He scattered them to every nation, and now he's essentially sampling them to be representatives of every nation. So representative of the mixed multitude, sort of, in that, like I said, they were sampled from multiple nations, but also that they were specifically known as Jews. Because within Judaism, whether you were born a Jew or formally converted, if your conversion was accepted, you're just considered a Jew.
Any idea why the animals were 3 years old instead of the usual 1?
Nope. Well, I think there's different ages that are listed for some of the different offerings. For example, Passover had to be a yearling, right? Of the first year. Some offerings it doesn't specify, but I feel like there was a 3-year-old. Was it the red heifer that had to be 3? I don't remember.
I can't remember either.
Yeah, I think it's the red heifer that was supposed to be 3 years old.
Okay, very good. All right, well.
Going once, going twice.
Pick me.
Oh, wait, yeah.
Oh, Brian.
Brian, yeah.
Okay,
Sorry, Brian. See, when you sit all the way at the back there, I sort of overlook you, which is hard to do because you're like
This
6
is mic on, I think. Is this working?
What?
Is the mic working?
Brian, are you going to use your mic up there, or you want to use this one? Here, I'll give you this one.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, use that one because the one you've been using is a little too quiet for me up here.
Thank you. Hey, so I put on the live feed. They get, if someone stumps you, they get points towards merch on our website after
That would
Sabbath.
require us to have merch on our website.
So that's the question. Abraham. So the historical Muslim understanding is, the Jews, Christians, Muslims are people of the book. Mm-hmm. So they're all supposed to be friendly and more related to each other than, it's like someone like a Buddhist or a polytheist. Now, I don't think they carry that out, but since we are all technically children of Abraham, if you're believing Yeshua, you're grafted into Israel, and Abraham fathered the Jews, the Israelites, the Christians, etc., the Muslims. How do we relate to those other groups that are monotheistic, Abrahamic faith, but they're not really in covenant with Yeshua? Or how do you relate to the Jewish community, the non-believing portion of the Jewish community?
Yeah. Well, hopefully you would relate to anyone from the same starting point, right? And actually, that brings up what I intend to start after finishing this series is on the fruit of the Spirit. That's how you should relate to people, is living and exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit. A lot of times we have this idea of, oh, well, they're non-believers, or even for Torah-observant Jews, you say, well, they don't accept Yeshua, and we sort of other everyone. There is inclusive and exclusive terminology used in the New Testament. Our goal should be to live and to treat people in such a way that they would say, hey, you know what, this guy is different. Beyond that, and Paul even says in 1 Corinthians, what have I to do with judging outsiders? Right? So, you live in goodwill with other people. You try to show them love because that's how believers are supposed to be known. Yeshua said that's how the disciples would be known, not for their great works of law, but for their love for one another. That's the starting point. So we should be known. We should be observably different. That should be the goal to Muslims or what have you. So as far as relating to them, hopefully we're relating to virtually everyone in love, peace, right, patience, kindness. If you mean more of a theological perspective, there's a lot of believers in Yeshua all over the world in all kinds of various places. I try not to be overtly restrictivist. I will instead plead the fifth. No. I would say, first of all, I don't know anybody else's situation. You're not going to know somebody else's heart. But you also don't know who is faithful to him and loyal to him and who has rejected him, unless somebody just overtly tells you that. But
So there's some more questions online about the questions about the Gauls, or Galatia. So Galatians, there's kind of two views sometimes. Part of one of this, these are Jewish people that are trying to return to Torah and just return to Judaism and all the Talmud, et cetera, the Mishnah. And the other view is that these are actually Galatians are actually from Gaul, because we talked about Spain a little bit. From Spain and France, they lost the war with the Greeks, got moved over to Turkey, where Galatia was. Which view do you think is more historical? Were these Jewish people were coming back to Judaism, and the additional non-Torah aspects of Judaism, or these Celts from Gaul that were returning to some pagan traditions? As Paul talked about in the beginning, they looked at signs and seasons, etc.
Yeah. So this is one of the many times that you can't say, well, the scholarly consensus is, because there isn't one. In fact, there's a dispute over who exactly this is talking about and whether Paul wrote it to southern Galatia or northern Galatia, because yes, that makes a difference. So there's too much to debate on those two sides of the issue to really make a comment one way or the other on that, in my opinion. From the content of the letter itself, it seems pretty clear to me that he's relating the same sort of division that had happened at Acts 15. So you have this idea that, yes, there are Torah-observant Jews coming in. Acts 15 starts not by saying there were Jews coming in saying, hey, do all this extra stuff. It says there were some of the Jews, it says certain men, right, came down from Judea and began teaching this. And then some of the believing Pharisees said, yes, they need to be circumcised and keep the law. But those are already mentioned as two groups. And then you have the apostles and the council that's mentioned sort of as a third group. So Galatians is related to that event in that at its core you have these, well, you can't really call them rabbinic Jews because the system didn't exist yet, but essentially religious Jews coming into this area and teaching people, you need to convert to Judaism before you can be considered a covenant member of God's people. That was essentially what it was. You needed ritualistic conversion, which is why he uses the example of circumcision, but he uses it to represent the whole concept, not just merely the physical act, but the concept of conversion itself. Essentially, what the Galatians were being told was, you can't be a covenant member with God. You can't be accepted as one of his children if you don't convert to Judaism. And so when Paul writes his response, a rather fiery response, sometimes the English tones that down. If you can read it, especially in Greek, it's a very angry letter, very emotional letter. So his rather harsh response is, he basically calls them stupid, right? Oh, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you, right? In today's term, we'd be like, you stupid. But essentially, the core of the issue is, like I said, you had religious Jews coming in saying, you can't have salvation if you don't ritually convert to Judaism. And Paul's fiery response to that was, look, there is no Jew or Greek, because the covenant to Abraham was to encompass all, and the fulfillment of that is here in Messiah. Messiah is the starting point. He's not the thing that you're over here trying to get to after you've done a few good works. He's the starting point. That's the beginning of the salvation story, the beginning of how God saves his people.
Great. So I have one last question, and then there are some online Jeff might want to handle. So there's a mythical last chapter of Corinthians, I believe it is, or last chapter of Acts, where Paul actually goes to Spain. I don't know if you've read that or heard of that, but
I've read it.
Commentary on that.
Commentary on it? It's fake. That's the simple version. Yeah, I think it was found in the 18th century, and allegedly it was written in Italy in the 14th or something. It's from I think it's the Soncino manuscript that it exists in. Ultimately the biggest problem is there's no ancient copies of it. There's no old manuscripts of it. There's no other attestation of it. You have no church fathers quoting it. And even when they come in later, they say, see how Paul wanted to go to Spain? There's very little to say, oh, but this hidden chapter of Acts over here, it says that he actually, he went over here, and ultimately it doesn't even say Spain, it says he went to Britain, which is why British Israelism was really huge on saying that was actually authentic. Because, see, Paul came here, and that's how, we got, because we're all Israelites. It was weird. But yes, so there's no attestation of it, there's no additional manuscripts, there's no ancient evidence of it. So in short, there's no reason to think it's authentic. I just put it that way. Other than, like I said, some sort of agenda where people really want it to be.
Question about Exodus 24, 9, and 10. I don't know that this is related to the message, so I'll let you decide if you want to try to tackle this.
Question about what?
I don't know that this is related to the message. So, Exodus 24, 9, and 10. Why can't we all see God if these 74 did see God and ate with him?
I'm confused on the question.
Exodus 24, 9 and 10. Maybe just look it up. I don't know. Real quick.
Yep. Is this a King Jimmy? I don't know if I can read the King's English. 24, 9 and 10?
Exodus 24, 9 and 10.
Oh, yeah. Moses and Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and they saw God of Israel, and under his feet it were, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in his clearness.
So the question is, why can't we all see God if these 74 did see God and ate with him?
Because he allowed it. I mean, that's really the short answer is, there were very specific times that he did. From Jacob's own pronouncement, Jacob wrestled with God, right? He even says, I saw God face to face. How do you wrestle with God? I mean, if you can't even stand before him because beholding his glory itself is, enough to kill you. Apparently, there's some form of God. Now, generally, the way this goes is it's a Christophany, right? Anytime there is an encounter with God, it is an encounter with Yeshua. God, quote unquote, God came and ate with Abraham. God's not physical. He doesn't get hungry. He doesn't need to eat. Right? But Yeshua did. We know that because he said, I thirst. Right? I mean, he had human needs and all that. So generally, this is explained by saying that it's a Christophany. It is essentially Yeshua because that is the form of God that has always had interaction with man whenever man has come face to face, whether it's wrestling with him or appearing as the captain of the hosts before Joshua and so on. So why can't we do it today? Not every Israelite did anyway. Right? There were very, very few, in fact, so few encounters that we have just a few of them written out. So it wasn't the rule, it was the exception. Now we will, right? We will live with him. And that's what the New Jerusalem describes, is that we will dwell with him, but not yet.
And that kind of answers the next question. The follow-up was basically like, was this because it was before the people had said they didn't want to see or hear from God? And your answer pretty much answers that. It's not because of that. It's because God appeared to them. And in this particular case, Christophany, Paul and Lori Normando said theophany, right? It's that God appeared to them in some particular way that wasn't quite the way that the biblical authors meant when they said no one has either seen or heard from God at any time. So that's all the questions online.
All right.